Thanks, Nancy, and thanks to the Pritzker Library for having me here, and thank you all for coming out. I know your friends are probably grilling brats down at the lake or something right now, right? It's an amazing day. I'm going to read a bit from my new book, a section that takes place in D.C. at the Bethesda Naval Hospital, and then also at a dinner later that same day for wounded soldiers. And then I might pop around a little more and then just talk a bit about writing about the military, which I've done a bit of. I want to do more of it, though. I'm a recent father, and really all I want to do is hang out with my baby and talk about my baby, but I'm not going to do that tonight. Somewhere between Elizabeth and Princeton, I looked at my speedometer and realized that I was going 120 miles per hour. In my mind, I'd been back in the desert driving a Humvee. We were spraying fire everywhere, me driving with my left hand, my M16 in my right, the barrel out the window, and me letting loose on burst. I didn't care who or what I hit. Now I let the engine drop speed slowly. On the shoulder ahead of me, a guy changed a tire on his beater truck. My first thought was vehicle-borne explosive device. Then I saw the wife and child holding hands at the rear of the vehicle. They waved. The man wore dirty Con Ed overalls. In black and white, it could have been a scene out of Dorothea Lange, or in a novel, it would have been Steinbeck. People driving beat-up cars in art and books, I thought. Someone should write a dissertation. My right hand gripped the gear shift as though it were the pistol grip on my life. No, as though it were the pistol grip on my rifle. But I had no ammunition here on the road to Bethesda, and the targets remained unclear. I poured water over my head and blasted the radio. I took the speedometer back up to 90. I thought of the young kids missing limbs at Bethesda. What would I say? I made it to Bethesda and somehow in the labyrinth found the office that I needed to find. A naval officer from the Bethesda media team arrived to escort me to the injured Marine floor. I made plans with the Marines to meet up with them later at the dinner in D.C. As we walked onto the ward, my first impulse was to bolt. I hadn't been to a hospital since my brother died. I knew the smells and the sounds, the antiseptics, and the low whirl of machines that give and take life. I knew the collective heartbeat of a hospital floor holding so many lives in fine balance. I did not belong here. I would wreck the balance. But that was not the plan of the day. For me to leave was not the plan. The naval officer showed me into a room where a mother bent over her young Marine son. He'd arrived 2 days before. They were not sure that the kid would live. A week earlier, he'd taken a sniper round to the forehead. The swelling was down. He blinked when his mother spoke to him, but he could blink for only a few hours a day. I remembered that the family was from Ohio. Someone from the naval media team asked me to sign a copy of Jarhead for the kid. I wrote it out to Tommy or Timmy or whatever his name was, knowing he'd never read it. His mother was overly polite. She took the book from me and smiled and said she'd read it to him. And I thought, Jesus, please read the kid something with a little bit of hope, not my bleak book. What are you going to give a mother from Ohio to read over the deathbed of her 19-year-old son, I thought. I walked out of the room with my minders. My brain hurt. I was short of breath and thirsty. The minders got called away for a moment, and they asked me to stand by. Ahead of me in the hall, I saw a man in his 50s leaning against the wall outside a patient room. He wore a red T-shirt emblazoned with Marine Dad. The guy was big. He'd once been an ox of a football player, somewhere in the Middle West, I guessed. I approached him. "Excuse me, sir, can I ask you a few questions?" I said. "Who are you, son?" I read former Marine officer right away, Vietnam, 68 to 70. I could see it in his eyes. "I'm a former Marine and a writer," I said, "and I'm just here on the ward to listen to some stories, see how the Marines are doing." "Who are you here visiting?" "My boy," he said, and he pointed at his sweatshirt and looked at me as though I were stupid. He continued, "He's in surgery right now, below the knee on one leg, above the knee on the other, once it all shakes out." "Son, I was in Vietnam. I saw a lot of men die, but I've just spent 3 weeks up here, and I never saw men injured so heinously. The boys are ripped to shreds. Go room to room and you'll see. And look at all the mothers. I'm one of the only fathers up here because the fathers are back at home earning money or they've never been around. I'm lucky. After my time in the Corps, I was an executive at a bank. I retired a year ago. I've got 2 pensions. I can afford to cool my heels here and look after my son. I can do this for the rest of my life. But look at the mothers, he said. Some of them are married, but you know the story. Many of these boys come from broken homes, poor homes, single mothers. These women, they thought they were going to refashion themselves after 50, live new and dazzling adventures, but they're going to be feeding and bathing their sons for the rest of their lives. He placed his hand on my shoulder and asked me to look after any Marine I ever could. A woman approached. She was clutching copies of a newspaper article to her chest. This is the article they ran on Sam yesterday in the paper, she said. It's so touching. They captured him. He couldn't speak, but he blinked his eyes and they captured his soul. The woman began to cry and the Marine dad comforted her. May I give you one of these about my son, she asked me. Yes, ma'am, I said. I glanced at the article, a front page story with color photo from Wednesday's paper in Cleveland or Cincinnati or wherever. This woman at her son's bedside, the son immobile, neck brace, oxygen mask, legs in traction, the boy barely visible beneath his bouquet of medical material. Who are you with? She asked. Just then my minders arrived and introduced me to the woman. She asked for a signed book and I gave her one. She told me that a week or so before Wolfowitz had been on the ward, but she was much more excited to meet me. The woman told me that the care her son received was top-notch and that the support staff had been wonderful. I glanced at the photo of her son on the cover of the newspaper. He's a sweet boy, she said. The Marine dad walked away. The woman looked at me and said, I'm happy for him. His son has a small wound. When losing most of both of your legs was a small wound, I would never be able to truly understand the depth of the despair these Marines and their families were suffering. During my war, I'd spent a short time at the entry point of this calamity, at the end where the bombs blew and rifles and RPGs shattered bodies, where warthogs sometimes fired on friendly troops, and I had totally forgotten about this end, the sick end, the destroyed end of it, the utter ruin of families. May I hug you, the woman asked. Yes, of course. I felt awkward, but I couldn't say no, could I? And she hugged me tight. She gripped me for life, for a memory of who her son had been, young, clean-shaven, strong. Of course, I was none of these things, but she would never hug her son while he stood upright. She wept into my shoulder. The lioness had lost her family. The moon darkened. Ice caps melted. How could we go on? She locked onto my eyes in a mildly wild and erotic way, her face full of tears. She was attractive in that high school librarian way, orderly and considered, handsome, that's what she was, and sturdy, and she possessed the orderly smell of all good mothers. Her son would be fine. He would never walk, and he might not talk, but he would have his mother, and somehow they would both know this and be well. This could not have been true, but it is what I told myself then, and it is the same lie that other Americans have been telling themselves for a decade, and we believe this because we have to. Nurses and orderlies swam around us in a school of green and blue scrubs. From every room came the nauseating white sounds of resuscitation, prolongation, the beginnings of altered lives. One of the minders grabbed me at the elbow and ushered me on to another room. In the 2 visitors' chairs of the room sat an extremely old woman and a girl who could not have been older than 10. They wore colorful indigenous clothing that to my untrained eye shouted Bolivia. The old woman chewed at her leathery lower lip, and the young girl beamed a smile that was as incongruous as their dress. My minders introduced me to the Marine. He was an infantry staff sergeant and had been blown up in a convoy. Both of his legs were in traction. He said, I'm going to walk again, man. I'm going to walk. His face bore the burns from human shrapnel. He said, my guys got blown up, but I lived, I lived. I got blown up, and I woke up right here in this bed. How many days later, I don't even know. I was having this dream of the Philippines, like a little island, and I was there with my platoon, but I opened my eyes and look at the end of the bed, and there is sitting my grandmother and my niece, and I haven't seen anyone from Bolivia in 14 years since I left, and I think, well, I guess I died in Baghdad, and here I am in heaven with my grandma and my niece. But then I think, wait, they aren't dead. How can they be dead? And they walk up to my side and say, you are alive. The grandma eyed me suspiciously.